Okay, so we are going to look at the explicit and systematic instructional practices, which is kind of an infographic. And what I'd like you to do is just either in the chat box or just come off of mute. Tell me what it looks like in the classroom. What do we do for that first one? So what do we do to review previous learning or look at what skills they already have? What does that look like in the classroom? Oh, and I lost my chat box. Let's see.
You just want to know examples?
Yeah. What does it look like in the classroom? Yep.
With my lessons, before we even started, it's just a simple question of what did we talk about yesterday? Or you can
Good.
ask the question, we were going over Black History Month and it was like, okay, have y'all heard of Martin Luther King? Yes. Okay. What do you know?
Good. So mostly we're probably going to pose some kind of question, right? We might even show a picture and say, do you know what this is? Can you describe what this is? So definitely, probably going to be some questions involved. And even just what did we learn yesterday? Perfect. Okay. What about the objective? What does that look like? Do we state it? Do we have it on the board? Both?
I do both. I stated and have it on my Promethean board and posted in the class.
Perfect. And we're probably doing, I know we do the Cub method, right? So we're trying to make it kid-friendly language and we want them to know what their target is, right? For the day or for the lesson. All right.
Yes, and I also use that as an opportunity to kind of tie it back to either what we're learning or to kind of like try to connect all the dots, so to speak. Like if we we're talking about it the day before and it's just an extension, then always try to take that opportunity to kind of try to make it connect to them so that they understand what it exactly means.
In both of those things, reviewing what we did before, knowing where we are, and then tying the objective in, we're really trying to make a smooth path of learning for the kids, right? We don't want them to question where we're going. We don't want them to question whether they know something or not. We want to create that smooth path from beginning to the end. Also, of course, using that gradual release model. So yes, I love those ideas. And I love that in our district, we really try to give them all three pieces, right? Which gives them more than one opportunity to kind of look from their lens on what the target is for the day and what they should know, understand, and then be able to do. Wonderful. Okay, what about activating or building background knowledge, and particularly building background knowledge? We're talking about our students with other languages, but we're also just talking about our economically disadvantaged students who just don't have life experiences that the people who create lessons or even that content requires them to have. So talk to me about kind of what we're doing to build background knowledge or to fill in those gaps before we even start a lesson.
What I do with my lesson is I use a lot of visuals. So if we were, I guess, maybe talking about Italy, ask them if they've ever heard of Italy before. I may show them some pictures and we just go from there. I teach resource, so it's a little different for me, I guess.
Well, and actually it's not, it's just, that's your lens, but definitely we do that in the other classrooms too. Ms. Broughton, what did you have to add to that, or you concur with what she said?
Yeah, I definitely do what she does, but I also use that time when we're like doing our KUBs to look at the vocabulary and connect that to background knowledge, because we'll say, okay, now have we seen this word before? Does it remind us of another word we've used before? Because I teach math, and so we talk about, okay, it's talking about fractions, but it's talking about the unshaded. How could that be like the shaded? So we kind of talk through the KUB, but try and connect it to things we've done the previous day to try and make those connections before we start the new stuff, because I want them to know that, hey, we already know this. This is going to be just a little different, but we've got a good base of what we're already doing. So connecting it to that background knowledge or previously learned.
So we're layering that, right? And so if we tell kids where they're successful, then we can layer on the next layer. What I love about both of what you both shared is a vocabulary piece. That is our biggest gap when we talk about building background knowledge. Some of our kids have heard those words. Some of them have never heard those words. Some of them have some knowledge about it. But some of them heard it and have no idea what it is, right? And so that's when we went through module 5 about oral language, that's what we were talking about. You know, oral language is the basis of this. So if the kid has never heard the word before, then definitely bringing that forward with those visuals, like you said, is really going to help, you know, give us a strong foundation before we layer that higher learning on top of it.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
I've noticed some of the things. I try to preview the what we're reading because I teach ELA, and I noticed last year, since CKLA is so intense
Rigorous.
with history and stuff, like we were saying, Italy, do they know where Italy is? I would preview some of the words that we would consider like normal, like we know, okay, we know what this word means, but they may not know. Or if they're talking about something that happens in the wintertime, since we have a lot of native Texans around here, would they know what a toboggan is?
Yeah,
Would
or
they
snow sleigh.
understand what a radiator is? Because they've never had that, or they never understood the experience. Or like, yeah, okay, it's snow. Just like, no, you need to understand when it gets this cold or when the snow gets this high, you can't do X, Y, and Z.
And our kids used to get, I mean, if you look back over our educational experiences, I'm sure y'all are around my age, maybe younger. We got a lot of that through reading. But we didn't have the internet at our hands, right? So we read more than we searched for things. We're flip-flopped now, which is a good and bad thing. They can Google it and figure out what it is, but they really wouldn't have the knowledge, right, from just getting a definition. So we do have a lot of vocabulary work to do. That is the strength of a systematic curriculum like CKLA. And so I think when we see our kids who started with CKLA and kinder come through, it's going to be a different kind of student that we're teaching, because they not only have the skills, but they also have this content background. So definitely vocabulary is a huge part of that. Relevance, making it relevant to them, closing in the gaps for something they may not have experienced, definitely. All right, what about limiting new information? What do we do in our lessons to kind of limit that information so we're not giving it all at one time?
I think sometimes it depends the class you're teaching to, because I have 2 totally different classes. And so I know with my kids that are, you know, higher, that I can give them a lot more. And sometimes I can even give them anecdotal things just because they need all that information. And then with my other class, sometimes I have to kind of use either other examples, or I have to kind of, you know, scaffold it more, or maybe not go into as much detail, just because I know they're not going to grab onto it as fast as my other class will, and want more and more and more information. So I think you kind of have to look at your class too, to see how you're going to do that.
And knowing your kids, knowing their data, where they are, what they know and don't know. Thank you for bringing that up, is vital to us knowing how to pace our lesson, right? And I know CKLA paces it for us, but I also know that as good teachers, we can't move on until we've reached a level of understanding for the first part, right? Someone did talk about using pre-tests, and I'm sorry, I just saw it in the box, but pre-tests are one way to build, background knowledge, or even know where the kids are, so you know how much information to feed them at a time, so to speak. So yes, and we really chunk it, right? We know kiddos' attention spans are about a minute per their year. So if they're 7 years old, maybe they can have a span of 5 to 7 minutes where they're working on something. If they're 10, they should have about 10 minutes where they can focus on working on one topic. So we've got to constantly be changing what we're doing. This is why lecturing doesn't work, right? It didn't work when we were young. It doesn't work now, because our attention just isn't going to be there. Okay. All right. So we're going to chunk it. We're going to pace it well. We're going to use data to do that. All right. What does demonstrating think alouds look like in a classroom or sound like? And while you're thinking about that, if you just jumped in, I dropped in two links in the chat box. We're looking at the explicit and systematic instructional practices now, which is a big piece of our project. So we want to review those. And then there is a template that's going to force you to make a copy. Please put your last name in the heading of that template. So when you share it with me, I know what you're thinking. All right, so what do those think alouds look like or sound like in the classroom? It's really just thinking out loud, right? I mean, it's just really what it says. Voicing your thoughts, right? So we're going to work through something. We're going to talk through it as if we're doing it on our own. Saying, I wonder how how we're going to do this, and then actually answering how you're going to do it. You're modeling your thinking. Great. So this is really a teacher model. We're showing them how to think. And this is vital for that higher level thinking. If we don't teach them how to think, then we can really never get to that high level of comparison, contrast, the abstract thinking. So when you think about the old Bloom's taxonomy levels, we really can never get to that, the highest level, if we don't teach them to think. Some kids will learn that connection automatically, but the bulk of our kids will not. Okay. So we're guiding them through the process of what to do and how we're thinking through whatever is in front of us. This can also be a way to model comprehension. So as you're reading aloud, you can be modeling what questions you're asking yourself. I've also seen that happen. And then you can tie it back to other learning. You're correct with that, Catherine. Thanks for adding that in there. So think alouds are just what they say they are. What about examples and non-examples? Those are pretty much straight like they're said. We're going to give some examples. A lot of times we leave out non-examples, but there is a lot of times when non-examples will help clear up confusion. So I encourage us to continue to look for those opportunities. And let's talk really quickly about engagement. So how are we going to maximize student engagement in the classroom and throughout our lesson? Because our lesson is going to span like hour and a half, right? That's about our block. And we know that kids can only focus between 5 and 10 minutes at a time. So how are we going to keep them engaged?
I have them do group talks. Also, if possible, we get up and we move around. We actually have a designated time after we take attendance where it's like, okay, everybody stand up and we're going to stretch to kind of get them back where they need to be. We just did the Viking unit then it had a quest. So they actually had to like row a longboat. So they were
Good.
up and they were active.
Yeah, any opportunity to bring in that kinesthetic learning, the movement is great. Turn-in talks or academic talks, partner talks, all of those. If the kids are talking, they're engaged. You can't check out if you're having a conversation with somebody. Okay, so both of those are wonderful ideas. Partnering up with students. Yep. What else?
I like to do centers. I teach a higher grade level and they still enjoy centers.
Centers keep them engaged. For some reason, if we put an activity in a center, they think it's a game instead of an assignment, but not necessarily, right? But they do. There's something about sending people to groups. First of all, they do get up and move around a little bit. They get to interact with a different student, maybe than normally, that they normally sit by. And then choice. So if they get to choose what center they go to, that's even a bigger bang for your buck, right? So awesome.
And I also do this thing called trash get ball, because you get to throw a paper ball in a trash can. And if you make it, you get to answer a question and you get like a ticket for it. And also 4 corners. especially if it's a review for a quiz that we took. Except for me having a graded, they could do the A, B, C, D. So that gets them up and moving, and they enjoy it. So there's
Yeah, much like the rowing example, you can ask a question that's academic, or even give them 4 vocabulary words and tell them that you want to talk, you want their team to come up with an understanding or looking at the picture and let them describe it as a team, and they can choose which corner they want to go to. Or like, I think that was Miss Malone, wasn't it? Saying like, here's choice A, go to this corner, B, this corner. And so kids move, and then they have to be able to justify why they went to that corner. I also did some paper throwing in my 4th grade classroom, but we called it a snow fight. And usually that was a star review, unfortunately. So when we were doing the higher level questions that took multi-steps, I'd split the class, and then they do a problem or read a passage, either way, try to answer a question and then throw it across to the other team. And I had a team leader that had the answers. And so if it was right, it went in their basket as a point. If it was wrong, it got thrown back so they could look at it again. So, just all those things we do as teachers just to try to make it fun, try to keep them engaged. You guys are on that one.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, or the G word, anything you call a game is now fun.
Yep. Or a challenge.
Yeah, it can be the same thing they didn't want to do, but you call it a game and now it's fun. So
Yep.
it's like,
Call it a game. Tell them it's them against you. Who knows more? They like that. So anything we can do to engage them. Awesome. Pacing appropriate, instruction appropriately. We kind of already talked about that. You've got to know your kids, and then sometimes our curriculum paces it as well. But really, if we know what checks for understanding are, those are going to drive our pacing. So someone just quickly tell us what things can be used as a check for understanding, because as a teacher, I'm checking throughout the lesson. Like, where are you? Are you with me? Are you learning it right? So what does that look like in the classroom? What are some options for check for understanding? Exit tickets. Yep. That's usually at the end or when you're transitioning, right? Even the 4 corners activity that was just mentioned, that could be one.
I have them discuss it with the another partner, what they learned.
Partner talk.
Mhm.
Good. I see thumbs up or thumbs down to kind of gauge where they are with something. Sticky notes, and they can post an answer on a sticky note or post a reply on a sticky note, like a discussion post. Questioning and listening to their answers. So if we're asking a question and we're gonna have them turn and talk, we already know what we're trying to listen for, right? We know what the answer is that we really want to hear, but we would also know, well, maybe a lower level answer. What would that sound like? So you can kind of gauge where your kids are. Awesome. All right, let's move on to corrective feedback. What does that sound like in a classroom?
Small groups.
Small groups, when you can give feedback one-on-one, right? Or one-on-4. Absolutely.
I usually start by celebrating something they did in their answer and then explain how they could have done a separate part of it in another way.
Perfect. So corrective feedback, we've got to frame it in the hamburger style, something they did well, something we need them to do better, and then something they did well, right? So kind of sandwich that feedback in the middle. Also, we want to be very specific. Great job doesn't tell me, much. Yay, great job. I got a star, right? Like when we were raised, we got like gold stars, but my gold star didn't tell me what exactly was I doing right. Out of all the things I was doing. So being very specific, hey, Jamie, I noticed that you underlined some key vocabulary terms. Way to go. Let's talk about those, right? So then we can kind of gauge her understanding on those words. Or even to a group who's talking, I heard you all say, and then state what you heard them say. And I love that idea, but now I want you to talk about and then layer another question. right? So we want to make sure that that feedback is specific. The faster the feedback can come, the better it is. And if we can give one-on-one feedback, especially to those struggling learners, that is what we're really focused on. Asking students if they agree or disagree can help us kind of check for where they are and then where we need to go. And then I love that. If they get some answer, if we ask them a question, they get it wrong, then restate the answer, right? Or, hey, you know, you're on the right track, but can you think about this? So continuing to drive them forward. We don't want to leave them with the wrong answer. Okay. So we don't want to tell them straight up you're wrong, but we don't want to leave them with the wrong answer. So we got to find that light in what they gave us as their corrective feedback and then push them forward, right? And then we've already kind of covered the reteaching. I think y'all are on top of that. So the purpose of going over these instructional practices is we're about to look at a lesson where you'll have to find these in the lesson. And so kind of recalling what they look like, sound like in the classroom will help us be able to better identify them within a lesson to meet the criteria of this project.